Hello everyone, welcome back to Song Time. We are currently reading The Willigrews by Terry Tarbox, and he's a local author who said that we can read his stories and share them for story time. So thank you very much, Terry. So everybody sit yourselves down, get comfortable, maybe wrap yourself up in a snuggly blanket, and let's enjoy chapter 5 of The Willigrews. The Willigrews and the Big Sneeze. You may remember that in a previous story about the time case, I mentioned a Willigrue called Doc Dickory, who was named after his great-grandmother's favourite nursery rhyme. Actually, he was named after his great-grandmother's next-door neighbour's aunt's favourite nursery rhyme, but we won't worry about that. Well, he was the tribe's only doctor, and he was, therefore, highly thought of by everyone. Doc always wore his white doctor's coat and had a stethoscope hanging round his neck, even in bed. He hardly ever frowned and usually had a kindly, understanding smile on his face, which showed his rather large, sticky-out 2 front teeth to full effect. Doc was a kindly soul who would never dream of taking advantage of his position. In fact, he was training an assistant to take his place when he retired. The assistant's name was Plister, which meant he can treat a cold, but don't go to him for dizzy spells. One winter day, as Doc Dickory was saying goodbye to his last patient at his front door, he noticed someone running towards his surgery. It was Clarinod Dillip, who was about 10 years old and lived just down the road. She sprinted up to the doc's door, but the road was very icy, so when she stopped, she didn't, if you see what I mean. As she whizzed past Doc, she shouted, "Please go see my mum! We can't stop her sneezing!" With that, she disappeared down the hill at full speed. The doc went back to his surgery and got his bag. "I won't be long, Plister. I've got to make a visit," he said to his assistant. He made his way carefully down to his patient's house. When he arrived, the front door was open, so he went straight in. "Cooey, Mrs. Dillip, are you here?" he called. "Achoo!" came the reply. She was in bed. Doc sat on the edge of the bed and asked Mrs. Dillip what the trouble was. "Achoo!" she replied. "You've already told me that," said Doc. "But achoo!" she continued. "That's better," said Doc, "but it doesn't tell me what's wrong." Mrs. Dillip started to look a bit angry. Okay, chuckled Doc. "I'm only joking. I realise that you've got a bad foot." "Oh, there I go again. Only kidding. I'll be serious now. When did the sneezing start?" "Achoo!" Doc asked if it had started during the night. She shook her head and sneezed. He asked if it was in the morning. She sneezed and shook her head. Then he asked if it was yesterday afternoon. She shook her knees. No, she shook her sneeze and head. "I know," said Doc. "Yesterday evening." Mrs. Dillip nodded this time, but still sneezed. "I'd like you to take these little pink pills. Take 2 every 4 hours. Or is it 4 every 2 hours? I tell you what, take half a pill every hour," said Doc. "If you're no better in the morning, I'll get my assistant to come and bless you when you sneeze." Doc said goodbye, and Mrs. Dillip replied, "Achoo!" Doc was thinking about what to have for lunch as he walked home, but when he got there, his waiting room was full to the brim with patients, and worse still, sneezing patients. In the corner stood Plister, looking very harassed with a huge wad of cotton wool in each ear. "Thank goodness you're back," shouted Plister above the din. "I tried giving them prescriptions with 'bless you' written on them, but they wouldn't go." Doc Dickory was baffled and wondered what was causing the outbreak of sneezing. He found out by questioning the patients who could talk between sneezes that they had no other symptoms. They were simply sneezing. "What I can't understand," said Doc thoughtfully to Plister, "is why all these Willigrews have caught it and we haven't." "I see what you've mean," replied Plister. "Oh no, not you as well," exclaimed Doc. "I suppose it will be me next." Doc sent everyone home, telling them to keep warm until he found a cure. He then made some lunch and sat down to eat, still trying to think of a cure for this problem. I suppose, he thought, this is an epidemic. Well, one of those things that everybody gets at the same time. Eventually, Doc decided to take the problem to Bromley, his leader. Bromley was on holiday with his family, however, so Vectorn was in charge this week. Doc went to her home and explained the problem. Sneezing, eh? Said Vectorn. Jolly old sneezing. A touch of the old achooes, eh? Yes, replied Doc. No other symptoms, no sore throat, no runny nose, no aches and pains, no ears turning green, just sneezing. Well, said Vectorn as she chewed on a chickweed stalk, being a doctor, you should know that if you want to find a cure, you have to find a cause. That's easy for you to say, remarked Doc. Vectorn admitted she did find it pretty easy to say. The two decided that Doc should run some tests on the air and water in Willigrews to see what he could find out. He left after asking Vectorn to let him know if she thought of anything else that might help. Rest assured, replied Vectorn, if I think of anything, you'll know before I do. Back at the surgery, Doc spent several hours running the tests without success. He then tried walking the tests, but still with no success. As one last effort, he tried jumping the tests up and down on the spot, but that didn't work either. Over the next few days, the sneezing spread until almost everyone had to stay indoors on Doc's orders. As this meant that the chickweed beds were unattended, Vectorn became worried that the food supply would run out if the crops became overrun with weeds. She was pondering this problem when she heard the familiar sound of something coming through the letterbox. "'S funny," she thought. "The post Willigrews has already been." She picked up the letter, which had no stamp and nothing written on the envelope. She quickly opened the door, but the street was deserted. Vectorn pretended to put on some spectacles. She did this because, although her eyesight was perfectly all right, she liked to practice putting specs on in case she ever did need to get them. This way, she thought, she would get used to them more quickly. Inside the envelope was a small scrap of paper on which was written, "The answer is quite clear. If you want to cure the sneeze, you must go to the seer in the land of antifreeze." Now, Vectorn had heard about the seer from her mother when she was young. He was an old, old man. He wasn't old twice, he was just very old, who had strange visions about the future. The stories about him all told how his cave was guarded by a fearsome pub landlady whose cry of, "Get out of my pub, you bard!" would burst through a Willigrews' eardrums at 30 paces. Vectorn shivered. Not in fear, it was just that someone had opened the back door and caused a draught. It was Longstint. "Hello, old chap," said Vectorn. "You didn't make me jump just then." "OK, I won't apologise for making you jump then," replied Longstint. Longstint explained to Vectorn that he had spoken to Doc Dickory about the sneezing problem and wondered if he could help. "Well," said Vectorn, "I've decided to go and see the seer to see if he can help us. I've looked up the land of antifreeze in my atlas, and it's a very long way away." Longstint volunteered immediately to go with her and promised to handpick 4 other non-sneezers to accompany them on what they knew would be a dangerous quest. They decided to meet outside the meeting hall on the following day at dawn and to make sure everyone wore their thermals because it would be very cold on the journey. As most of the village was staying indoors because of the sneezing, there was no crowd to see the little group off, so they set off by themselves into a very cold, crisp morning, their feet making crunchy sounds in the snow which had fallen overnight. In addition to Vectorn and Longstint, the others were Partiv, Parslino, and Dora Dingbat. Not much use, but, as before, good fun to have around. Zambarina had been intending to come, but she had started sneezing, so had to stay in the warm and eat hot chickweed soup and rolls. Crowfin took Zambarina's place. As the little green furry band got into their stride, they started to sing a little song. We are crunching in the morning through the snow. We are crunching all together, walking slowly in a row. Can you hear us? Can you hear us as we're crunching through the snow? You can hear us if you're near us, walking slowly in a row. They walked for most of the day without seeing anything interesting. Then, just as they were looking for a safe place to rest for the night, a figure appeared up ahead. It was a small creature bouncing along on one leg. You couldn't say it was hopping because the one leg it had looked like it was all it was meant to have. Although the creature didn't look all that dangerous, the Willigrews hid behind a bush and listened. As it approached, they could hear it singing very loudly. I'm a one-legged yaxie, and I'm looking for my home. I'd call for a taxi, but no one's invented the phone. Oh, I'm lost, 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 and I will be till I'm found. If I could find my way home, if someone would lend me £1. Then it spoke the last line rather more quietly. I'll pay you back on Friday. I'm expecting a postal order. Vectorn was the first to come out of hiding. Goodness, the creature said with a start. You gave me a fright. It put the start and the fright in its pocket. Longstint said under his breath, We caught him on the hop. Sorry, old chap, said Vectorn, but you can't be too careful when you're travelling in a strange place. You could have been a robber. I could have been, replied the Yaxie, but I failed the entrance exam. He then introduced himself as Gonley and explained that he came from a tribe called the Yaxies, and he was lost because he had hopped down a rabbit hole and been forced to wait for the rabbit to come out and give him a push. What a shame, said Vectorn. Where does your tribe live? Perhaps we could help you find your way home. Very kind, I'm sure, said Gonley. But you see, my tribe are travellers and only stop long enough to prepare to leave again. So I'll just have to keep on bouncing along until I find them. They parted, wishing each other luck, and the Willigrews decided to stop there for the night. In the morning, they ate some breakfast and set off again, wondering what the new day would bring. After several hours of walking past trees and fields and hills and more trees, and another hill and 2 toadstools and a very interesting broken twig, Crowfin thought he saw a Tyrannosaurus Rex carrying a handbag in a nearby field, but it was just a coat hanger that someone had thrown away. Vectorn decided it was time for lunch. Longstint put the kettle on and brewed some chickweed tea, and they discussed their next move. Vectorn was first to speak. Well, my little band of green furry types, what shall we do next? Shall we carry on walking, or shall we just carry on walking? I hate choices, said Crowfin. They confuse me. Why don't we toss a leaf to decide? Oh, let me toss the leaf, squealed Dora excitedly. I've got a GCSE in leaf tossing. They all agreed that Dora was the most qualified, so she found a leaf and tossed it expertly into the air, saying, If it lands on its front, we'll carry on walking, and if it lands on its back, we'll just carry on walking. Is that a choice? Asked Crowfin. Sounds like half of one and 6 dozen of the other to me. The leaf floated slowly down about in the cold morning air, twisting and turning and jiggling a bit on its journey. All the Willigrews followed the leaf's progress, watching it closely, moving their heads in a back and forth motion as it fell until it eventually landed on the grass. It had landed on its back, so its front was pointing upwards. That's decided then, said Vectorn. I've forgotten the choices now. The others reminded her, and they agreed to just carry on walking. On they went, and after passing the usual trees, fields, and potential dinosaurs, they found themselves in a large clearing in a forest. To everyone's amazement, sitting at a desk in the centre of the clearing was a strange-looking scientist. The Willigrews knew this because there was a sign above his head saying, Professor Longwedge, strange-looking, self-employed scientist. The group approached Professor Longwedge and looked up and said, Before you go any further, I need DNA samples from you all. You need what? Asked Vectorn. DNA, Crowfin interrupted. Deoxyribonucleic acid. I've said that wrong. I do apologise. Crowfin knew a few things he didn't know until he knew he... Crowfin knew a few things he didn't know he knew until he realised he knew them. Try and get your head around that one. Professor Longwedge explained that everybody who passed through this clearing had to leave a DNA sample in case there was a crime committed and the authorities needed help with their inquiries. He then instructed everyone to stand in a queue in front of his desk. The Willigrews lined up with Crowfin at the head of the queue. Right, said Prof. Longwedge. If you could all open your mouths, I will take a swab from each of you. Having said that, he proceeded to take a sample from inside their cheeks with a cotton bud. Dora was a bit worried. If the professor takes my swab now, she whispered to Crowfin, what will I do if I need it another time? Crowfin reassured her that she had more swabs than she could possibly use in her lifetime, and one less wouldn't make much difference. The professor thanked them all for their DNA and told them they could leave when they were ready. Well, I can tell you now that they were all ready, so they left. Waving goodbye to Professor Longwedge, the little green band trudged off into the forest. He was a bit odd, wasn't he? Said Parslino. Well, there was only one of him, replied Dora. There are 6 of us, so we're not odd, but even. They all laughed at Dora's words, except, that is, for Partiv, who had climbed a tree to see what was up ahead. Can you see anything? Asked Crowfin. I don't know, replied Partiv. I'm not sure what anything looks like. I can see something. It looks like an animal, and it's pretty big. Ugh! Squealed Dora. If it's a giant wasp wearing blue trousers and a tie-dyed halter-neck crop top, I'm going home now. Vectorn disagreed with Dora. A wasp wouldn't be seen dead in that kind of get-up, she argued, though you might expect it of a bee. Did you know, asked Crowfin, discovering that he knew something else, that really bees shouldn't be able to fly? Their wings are too small for their bodies. Well, how do they fly then? Asked Parslino. Crowfin explained. It may be that nobody told the bee that it couldn't fly, or perhaps it's just stubborn. My favourite theory, though, is that they have a hidden solar panel in their furry bits. Then, from behind a nearby hedge, came a little voice. Did someone want fashion tips? My name is Trudy Jellyjerk, and I'm fashion editor for the You'll Never Get Away with Wearing That magazine. No, You'll Never Get Away with Wearing That with That magazine. Oh, some of these sentences are complicated. Available at all good newsagents and 1 or 2 bad ones as well. All the Willigrews turned to look at Trudy as she emerged from behind the hedge. She was dressed in a trendy little number, the number 20, which really suited her. All the male Willigrews took special notice of Trudy, who was very beautiful. Crowfin just stared with his mouth open and his eyes popping out. His ears, however, didn't do anything very interesting. Trudy approached the group and said, I love your green fur coats. These aren't coats, said Dora. These are part of us. We're born with green fur. Well, I do beg your collective pardons, exclaimed Trudy. I apologise to each and every one of you individually and all of you in a collectively together way. That's all right, said Vectorn reassuringly. Your fur is very beautiful, Trudy continued, but have you ever thought about having some nice strawberry blonde highlights? May I have some? Asked Parslino excitedly. I love strawberries, especially with a big dollop of cream. Yeah, said Dora, hopping on the spot. Let's go and look for a strawberry shop, which is conveniently located next door to a cream shop. All the Willigrews started to jabber happily at the thought of strawberries and cream. Trudy could see that her fashion tips were not needed in this situation, so she waved goodbye to the Willigrews and disappeared back behind the hedge. Vectorn turned to Crowfin and told him to close his mouth and put his eyes back in. When he had sorted himself out, the little green band continued their journey, keeping an eye out for strawberry shops. They had been walking for quite a long time now and felt that their journey must be nearing its end. And sure enough, soon after that, a large mountain came into view. On top of the mountain was a gigantic sign that said, Welcome to Antifreeze. There was a problem though. Between the mountain and the Willigrews was a really huge lake blocking the way. Partiv turned to the others and said, "Wow, that's a really huge lake. How are we going to get from one side to the other?" Longstint was, as usual, the first to volunteer. "I'll swim across," he said bravely. Vectorn would not hear of it, saying that Longstint was very brave. She may have meant mad, but it was far too dangerous. "What we need is a boat," suggested Partiv. "But where are we going to find a boat in the middle of nowhere?" "So this is the middle of nowhere," said Dora. "I've always wondered where that was." The others all laughed and sat down in a circle. They never went anywhere without one, and tried to think of a way of crossing the lake. They sat in silence until suddenly someone's singing disturbed them. "And the landlubber's laying down below, 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 and the landlubber's laying down below." The Willigrews turned to see a small boat coming across the lake. In the boat sat what could only be described as a small sailor. He was dressed in full naval uniform. His face was hidden behind a huge beard, which was snowy white. His boat was called the Salty Sandwich, which was painted in red on a green background on the side of the boat. "Avast there, me hearties!" cried the sailor. "I'm Captain Codseye. I'll be guessing that you may require some convenient nautical transport." Dora looked at the others and remarked, "We don't want anything naughty. Brongley wouldn't like that." Everyone laughed, including Captain Codseye, who continued, "Aha! Scupper me main brace and splice the mizzen. I'll take you across to the other side, me beauties." Vectorn thanked Captain Codseye, and the Willigrews climbed aboard the Salty Sandwich. Once everyone was aboard, the captain raised the anchor and started rowing towards the other bank. He began to sing a song. He sang the first verse, and the Willigrews made up the rest. "A life on the ocean wave, a home on the rolling deep, where the scattered waters rave and the winds their revels keep. A life on the ocean wave, a home rolling on the deep, where the salty sea is wet and you never see a sheep. A life on the ocean wave, a trip to the local shop. If you spill something on the floor, you can buy a bucket and mop. A life on the ocean wave, a cat will never say woof, a dog won't say meow, and something that rhymes with woof." Then everybody on the boat started to stamp their feet to the beat of the song and sang it all over again. By the time they had finished, they were nearly at the other side. With a few more pulls of the oars, Captain Codseye announced their arrival. "All ashore that's going ashore," he shouted. The Willigrews climbed onto the bank, thanked Captain Codseye, and decided to have a meeting. They didn't sit in a circle this time, because they had left it on the other bank, as there wasn't room in the boat. Instead, they stood in a row in front of Vectorn and awaited her instructions. Vectorn began. "According to my map, the Seer's Cave is over in that direction. But firstly, we must decide how to avoid the pub landlady and her terrible screaming voice." The Willigrews scratched their heads. Dora scratched Partiv's head. "I know," said Dora. "Let's confuse her with funny wigs." Sorry for that noise. That's my dog. She was shaking her head. I don't know if she's enjoying the story. "I know," said Dora. "Let's confuse her with funny wigs." "How will that stop her from shouting?" asked Crowfin, quite sensibly for him. Dora said she didn't know, but she had brought a funny wig with her, and it would be a shame not to wear it. "I think we need a diversion," interrupted Longstint. Something to draw her attention away from us." The others agreed that this was a good idea, but wondered what would work on a pub landlady. Longstint suggested that he should approach under cover of night and divert her attention by saying something that would make her leave her post for a while. When the others asked him what he could say, he said, "I'll think of something." Dora argued that saying "I'll think of something" wouldn't work, and all the Willigrews laughed. When it got dark, Longstint set off for the Seer's Cave. The others wished him luck. As he approached the cave, Longstint could see the pub landlady standing guard at the entrance. She looked a bit fierce, short and stocky, with permed blonde hair. She stood with her arms folded and her big toes pointing upwards. Longstint got as near as he could without being seen, and then shouted in a loud voice. Well, I suppose he wouldn't shout in a quiet voice. "Landlady, we've run out of bitter and the barrel needs changing." To Longstint's delight, this had the desired effect. The landlady sprang into action. Her feet started running immediately, with her head following shortly afterwards. She disappeared into a neighbouring cave, rolling her sleeves up and looking determined. Longstint turned and waved to the other Willigrews. Vectorn and Crowfin came over, and the three of them entered the seer's cave. It seemed dark inside at first, but the cave opened into a large space, which was lit with many candles. Our fairy friends were a bit scared, but they need not have been. Sitting cross-legged on the cave floor was a little gnome-like creature with a face that was almost all smiles. "Hiya, dudes," he greeted them. "How's it hanging?" Then he held up his hand and said, "Give me 5. Crowfin replied politely, "Sorry, I've only got 4. He slapped the seer's hand anyway, and everyone relaxed. "So, what can I do for you today?" the seer asked. Vectorn explained about the sneezing problem and described the symptoms in detail. The seer said, "That's a toughie." He asked the Willigrews to give him a little time to think and told them to help themselves to tea and biscuits. There are some gypsy creams, some custard creams, and some jammy dodgers. Everyone tucked in, and much munching and slurping followed. After what seemed like a long while, the seer sat down in front of the Willigrews and said, "I think what you need is a bit of psychology." Before the seer could continue, Crowfin explained in a worried voice that he couldn't ride a bike and would like to be excused of that bit of the plan. The seer nodded wisely and continued, "When you get back to your village, gather every single Willigrew together and ask them all after a count of 3 to sneeze. Repeat this treatment every day at the same time for 5 days. The Willigrews looked a bit baffled, except for Crowfin, who looked confused. But out of respect for the wise old seer, they agreed to try his plan. Giving them a bag of biscuits and a flask of tea for the return journey, the seer said goodbye to the Willigrews and warned them to beware of the pub landlady, who, he explained, was a bit lurksome and might be lurking outside. Vectorn thanked the seer on behalf of the whole Willigrew tribe, and the 3 stepped carefully out of the cave. They were lucky. The pub landlady hadn't come back yet, and they hurried away towards their companions, who had been waiting patiently for them. They all decided they should start back home as soon as possible, in case the pub landlady shouted after them. When they reached the lake, Captain Codseye was waiting to take them back across. They had booked return tickets. However, they had not quite reached the centre of the lake when they heard a low rumbling sound coming from the direction of the seer's cave. At first it was like a drone, but as it got louder, the group heard a high-pitched scream, "Get out of my pub, you're bored!" The words echoed from the mountains and across the lake towards the boat. When the sound reached the Willigrews, the boat started to rock as the landlady's screams stirred the water up into huge waves. "Hold on, me hearties!" shouted Captain Codseye above the noise. "The sound won't hurt your ears. We're far enough away now." The others noticed that Partiv had suddenly turned a strange colour, a sort of purpley grey. He leaned over the side of the boat and threw up. As the boat was lurching up and down, the puke was momentarily suspended in mid-air, and then the wind caught it, and it hit Dora smack in the face. "Gross!" she squealed as she wiped bits of custard cream from her face. "Sorry," said Partiv. "I couldn't help it. It's the waves. I never expected to see my lunch again. Oh, look! There's a bit of jammy dodger as well." "You disgusting little Willigrew," Dora complained loudly, although she half smiled, seeing the funny side of the situation. The Willigrews never stayed angry for long. Eventually, the boat reached the bank and the waves settled down to a ripple. One by one, the Willigrews stepped onto solid ground, feeling very relieved. They thanked Captain Codseye once again, and he rowed away across the lake. Crowfin complained of having wobbly legs. Never mind, said Dora. We all get wobbly leg moments now and again. You go through life thinking that everything is wonderful, and you wake up one morning and find you're in the middle of a wobbly leg moment. Crowfin patted Dora's head and said, "Ah, bless your little furry feet." "Right," said Vectorn. "Let's get back to Willigrew." On the way home, the Willigrews talked excitedly about their adventure, but the journey back was pretty boring, apart from nearly getting trampled by a rampaging herd of giant whelks, almost getting squashed by a gigantic pilchard, and running into a swarm of very angry flying Rice Krispies. There is nothing worse than an angry breakfast cereal. Then nothing much happened. Soon the little band of adventurers reached the village of Willigrew. As they approached, a choir of sneezers greeted them. The whole tribe was there, waiting for their return, and looking miserable. Behind them was a huge pile of used tissues. "Thank goodness you're back," said Bronglae to Vectorn. "Have you found a cure?" "I hope so," Vectorn replied. Vectorn gathered all the tribe together in a row in front of her and asked for quiet. "Righto," she said. "I'm going to count to 3, and then I'd like you all to sneeze as loudly as possible. 1, 2, 3, she said loudly. Vectorn held her breath, but it was a bit heavy, so she had to put it down. "Come on now, a nice, big, hairy sneeze." But there was silence, not a single achoo. Suddenly Longstint, who started to sing, broke the silence. "If there's something strange in the Willigrew, who you gonna call? Sneeze busters!" Nobody sneezed. Everybody laughed and began to dance the Willigrew dance, hopping around on one leg, flicking their earlobes and bumping into each other as they joined in with Longstint's song. So that was chapter 5 of the Willigrews by Terry Tarbox, and we'll be reading the last chapter again. No, we will be reading the last chapter at another time. So we'll see you all soon. Bye-bye.